I anticipated changes upon enrolling in my new school. Having been born and raised in Philadelphia, relocating an hour outside the city demanded adaptation, a reality I had to accept. At the urging of my father and the insistence of my mother, I kept out of trouble. The town's population was, to put it mildly, diverse, but comprised of relatively few black people, along with some Italians and Jews. The majority were stubborn German Lutherans who exerted a strong influence over the community and its affairs. Despite this melting pot, I integrated easily, yet missed my Philadelphia friends. After graduation, I remained in the area primarily to be near my family, although I frequently visited my old neighborhood and maintained contact with old friends. My initial employment involved driving a fuel oil delivery truck. Within a few years, I transitioned to an inside position, dispatching and managing orders. I possessed a natural aptitude for the business, and within a few years, I envisioned myself owning a similar enterprise. Forming relationships with women proved effortless, and my social life flourished beyond expectations. My mother expressed some initial disappointment that my wife, Marcy, wasn't Italian, but she wholeheartedly embraced her without reservation. Following the birth of our 2 children, Marcy urged me to get a haircut, which I didn't oppose. However, as soon as the kids started school, Marcy desired to enter the workforce. My father held the traditional belief that wives and mothers shouldn't work. While I wasn't entirely certain of his reasoning, in hindsight, it made some sense. My objection wasn't Marcy working per se, but her socializing with her old acquaintances. I liked some of her friends, but not all. In high school, she'd been heavily involved in extracurricular activities, which I avoided, viewing those involved as pretentious and self-absorbed. I knew she had been sexually active before we met, as had I, but we never discussed our pasts. It was an unspoken understanding. Approximately 10 years into our marriage, things began to unravel. Marcy worked in the claims department of a national insurance company. I grew suspicious when she began working overtime and weekends. 6 months later, I realized our marriage was ending when, regarding a seminar, she said, "Tony, I just don't understand the problem. It's only for 3 days. I've already spoken to your mom and she's agreed to watch the kids. You'll be home in the evenings. I know you can cook for yourself." Her audacity astonished me. "Who's attending this seminar?" I inquired. She seemed to brighten when I responded. 6 girls from the department, Betty Klink from HR, and Rodney. I smiled, surprised she hadn't realized I knew about their special lunches and late-night meetings with her supervisor, Rodney Foote. Rodney and Marcy had grown up together. He was involved in every club and activity, except sports, during high school. "Do you take me for a fool, Marcy? I've known about you and Rodney for 6 months. If you think I'm letting you go away with him for 3 days, you're delusional." "Tony, what are you talking about? Rodney's my boss. There's nothing between us. I would never cheat on you." I stared at the empty Budweiser can, slowly rising from my chair and heading to the kitchen. I crumpled the aluminum, tossing it towards the trash, missing, but not bothering to retrieve it. The new beer hissed as I opened it and sat back down. Marcy sat, awaiting my response. "You're a good mother to our children. That's the only reason I haven't kicked you out. I spoke with my mom and explained everything. She advised me to remain resolute for the children's sake. If I leave you, the court will award you custody, and I won't allow that. Did you tell your mother I was cheating?" "No," a woman from church told her. I simply didn't deny it when she asked. "You're not serious. Why are you saying this?" I took a long drink of beer and smiled. "Rodney lives at 321 David Drive, 3 blocks from your office. You and your boss go there about 3 times a week, staying for nearly 3 hours each visit. Explain what you're doing at his apartment for 3 hours, then tell me about your overtime at the office. Did you know your office cleaning lady also attends church with my mom?" Her eyes fell, and her lip trembled. "As long as you don't publicly humiliate me or my family, I'll do nothing. If that changes, all bets are off. You can stay or leave, but you'll never take my boys from me." Visibly upset, she jumped to her feet. "Damn you, Tony! I hate you, you bastard!" With that, she stormed out, sobbing. It was the first time she had ever cursed at me, and the first time she'd insulted my heritage. The dam had finally burst. We had 2 sons. Boys, Terry and Rick, shared a room with bunk beds. The 3rd bedroom served as a multi-purpose room, and that's where I slept from that day forward. We were renting, but had over $60,000 saved for a down payment on our dream house, a dream that had now become a nightmare. The seminar was never mentioned again, and Marcy stopped working overtime, even bringing her lunch to work. The atmosphere at home wasn't just chilly, it was frigid. Mom no longer received updates from her church friends, and while things appeared to normalize, I remained deeply uneasy. Intimacy had ceased, a situation I wouldn't tolerate indefinitely. Against my better judgment, I agreed to accompany Marcy to her company's Christmas party. I didn't want her going alone, and believed I could spend a quiet evening keeping my distance. The plan was sound in theory, but flawed in practice. The company had rented a venue with a dance floor, buffet, and open bars. I could drink 3 beers over the course of an evening and feel no effect. By the time we arrived, the only available tables were near the company's executives, seats most employees clearly avoided. For the first hour, all seemed well. I spotted Rodney across the room, socializing with his colleagues. Several of Marcy's co-workers asked her to dance, but Rodney remained aloof. I was content letting her dance, as I had no desire to myself. I was starting my 3rd beer when I noticed Marcy and Rodney exchanging glances, subtle nods and head tilts, but definitely communicating. I feigned boredom and disinterest, but continued observing. When Marcy excused herself to use the restroom, I glanced around and noticed Rodney was gone. It was unbelievable. After our earlier conversation, I couldn't believe she would be so foolish as to meet him while I was in the same building. She had ample opportunity to see him at work without interruption. The only reason for this clandestine meeting, I concluded, was to humiliate me by flaunting their affair in front of her colleagues. His friends stood outside the bar, grinning, as Marcy walked down the hallway to the restrooms. She glanced back to ensure I was still seated before disappearing. On my way to the restrooms, I paused at the head table, leaning over and apologizing for the interruption simply to get their attention. The grinning group at the end of the hall suddenly looked worried, unsure how to react. I checked the women's restroom first, but it was empty. I had better luck in the men's room. There they were, kissing. Rodney's back was to me, his hand beneath her skirt, met with no resistance. I seized Rodney by the neck, stepped aside, and slammed his head into the tile. Something cracked. I heard Marcy screaming my name, but I was oblivious. I spun him around, his broken nose splattering blood on my shirt. He was still standing, albeit unsteadily, so I punched him in the stomach. He collapsed, vomiting. Marcy tugged at my sleeve, but I ignored her. The main hall fell silent as I dragged Rodney by his tie to the center of the floor. I was probably choking him, but I didn't care. The music had stopped. Everyone was watching. I looked around, daring anyone to intervene, but no one volunteered. I apologize for ruining your wonderful party. I have to go, but I'm leaving my wife here for your entertainment. Drop her off at home when you're finished, using her. Rodney, on his hands and knees, struggled to rise, his face a bloody mess. Marcy stood in the doorway, mouth agape, her expression a mixture of shock and horror. Whether at my actions or my words, I couldn't tell, nor did I care. Spotting Rodney beneath the mistletoe, I couldn't resist. Before leaving, I kicked him in the groin hard enough to ensure he'd remember it for a week. He crumpled, face hitting the floor again. That must have hurt. No one spoke. I called Mom from the car, asking her to pick up the boys. Leaving town for a few days seemed wise, and I didn't want to leave the children with their mother in her current state. I formulated plans as I drove, unsure of my destination or my next move. My boss readily granted me a week's leave. When I arrived at my parents' house, they were already there. After paying the babysitter, I helped pack the boys' things. My own bag contained mostly socks and underwear, with a few shirts and pants thrown in for good measure. Before leaving, I retrieved a box of cash from the basement rafters. Banks offered less than 1% interest on savings, so I kept the money at home. I know. I know. Keeping $62,000 in the house is foolish, but my mother's habit of stashing things everywhere in the kitchen was something I definitely inherited. I was about to switch off the lights when a taxi stopped outside and Marcy got out. She entered and sat on the sofa without a word, looking more concerned than furious, more exasperated than terrified. There's only one rule, I reminded her. Don't embarrass me or my family publicly. But you just couldn't help yourself, could you? I gave her a moment to potentially cry, then left. It was a little past 9 p.m. when I got onto the Schuylkill Expressway. This party was over quickly, at least for me. I planned to spend a few days in Atlantic City before going home, but first, I needed to talk to my old friend, S. He ran a small sandwich shop in my old neighborhood. Not a picturesque place like in those Philly road trip films, but a simple local convenience store. His primary source of income came from side hustles that most people either overlooked or took part in. He lived upstairs and worked in the back room. After explaining my predicament, it felt like old times. He readily agreed to assist. Tony, this will set you back $20,000. Can you manage, or do you need my support? I'll gladly repay you later. No problem. I'll handle it. Do you want it handled discreetly or with a big show? Quiet. Transparent. No drama, no disturbance, nothing noticeable. Do you need to disappear for a while? Have you made any arrangements? I was thinking of going to Atlantic City. What about 6 days and 5 nights at the Taj Mahal? What do you mean, S? I have some associates. I believe this could be mutually beneficial. Sounds perfect. You're going alone, Tony? Yes, it's all happening so fast. I haven't had time to invite anyone. You don't have to go solo. You need someone to corroborate your alibi. Give me a second. S picked up the phone and dialed a number I recognized. Carla, it's S. Get dolled up and get over here. A short pause ensued. No, it's nothing like that. You're going on vacation. He chuckled as he hung up. Tony, remember Carla? My brother Michael's eldest? Yes. The little girl with the dark brown eyes, always laughing. How old is she now? S grinned at my memory of his niece. She's 23 now, Tony, and not so little anymore. It dawned on me that Carla would be my companion in Atlantic City. It felt a little strange since she was S's niece, but he was the one who suggested it. Tony, do you have a credit card? I have 2. I plan to cancel them Monday morning. No, don't. Use them frequently. Meals, room service, even casino advances, but be reasonable. You need activity on the cards to confirm you were there. Spread it out so it doesn't look suspicious. It might cost a few thousand, but it's inexpensive insurance. S knew what he was doing. It all made perfect sense. As I was pondering this, Carla walked in. Tony! I haven't seen you since you moved downtown. You look great. Now I understood S's grin. Carla was absolutely stunning. Those dark eyes were captivating, and any baby fat she once had seemed to have redistributed itself advantageously. I jumped up, knocking over my chair in my surprise. Tony needs a companion in Atlantic City for a few days. Would you be interested? Her expression shifted subtly at his words. Aren't you married yet? She asked me directly. Before I could respond, S interjected. The marriage is over, Carla. Tony needs a friend right now. I knew you always liked him. S, I'm not going to break up anyone's family. It's not right to ask that of me. Besides, I'm not one of your call girls. Why not send one of them with him? I don't expect you to sleep with him. Just keep him company. Help him forget his problems. A knowing look crossed Carla's face, as if she'd figured something out. She was not only beautiful, but also quick-witted. I'm sorry, she said, shifting her gaze from S to me with a faint smile. I'd love to go with you, Tony, but you have to promise to buy me saltwater taffy. Now we were all smiling. It'll take me about an hour to get ready. Don't give him anything to drink, S, she added. I don't want to go with a drunk. I think she winked at me as she left to gather her things. S and I reviewed our conversation while Carla was away. He graciously accepted my $20,000 and guaranteed complete satisfaction. The trip to Atlantic City was uneventful, except for having to tell Carla about my problems with Marcy. Her only response was, "Oh, the poor kids." Carla frowned at the double beds in our room, but thankfully didn't notice my quiet chuckle. I had a feeling we'd only be using one of them for the rest of the week. All good things in due time. We gambled a little, but not excessively. I knew the house always wins in the end. Carla was content with the quarter slots, and I was just looking to pass the time. We spent more time dining and strolling along the boardwalk than anything else. Of course, we attended every show in town. The first night I was the perfect gentleman, but by noon the second day, Carla and I were tearing up the sheets. My mom was right. I should have married an Italian woman. It felt natural, not like cheating at all. On our fourth day, we were getting ready for dinner when we had visitors. 2 men, not in suits, but sport jackets. "Tony Randazzo, I'm Ray Fritz, and this is my partner, Rupert Marks. We're with the Berks County Major Crimes Unit. Can we talk to you for a few minutes?" Carla emerged from the bathroom in her bra and panties. Glancing at the men, she walked to the bed and grabbed her robe, slightly embarrassed but clearly aware they might show up. "Would you mind telling me what this is about?" I asked. "We'd like to discuss your relationship with Rodney Foote." I didn't have a relationship with Rodney Foote. My wife did. They seemed a bit uncomfortable. Fritz made small talk while Marks kept glancing at Carla. "We understand, Mr. Randazzo, that you spoke to him last Friday at the Continental Insurance Christmas party. Why? Is he pressing charges?" "No, he's vanished. We were hoping you could help us locate him." "Gentlemen, before we go any further, I'd like someone from the Atlantic City Police Department present, and I don't mean a patrol officer. If you can't arrange that, I'll need a lawyer. My lawyer. From Reading." My visitors didn't react. "Carla, get dressed. We're about to have dinner." "Sorry, guys, but we have a 6 o'clock reservation. The steaks at Safari are incredible. I'll likely be home this Friday. Would you like to come by and talk then?" They looked taken aback. "What makes you think something happened to him?" "Maybe he just left town. He was picked up by a taxi leaving Community Hospital Sunday morning, and no one's seen him since," I replied. Carla was dressed, and I was putting on my jacket. "Well, I've been here since Friday night. You can confirm that with the hotel staff. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have a dinner date. We have more questions. They'll have to wait until Friday. We expect to see you then." I simply nodded and guided them to the door. We rode the elevator down together in silence. In the lobby, they went to hotel security, and we headed to Safari. By the time I got home, Terry and Rick were showering me with attention. The saltwater taffy was a nice touch. Marcy, however, was distant. She clearly didn't understand what was expected of her. After speaking with the police, I spent the rest of the day with the boys, planning to talk to Marcy later. They settled down to watch TV, and I waited at the kitchen table for Marcy to finish cleaning up. It seemed to take longer than usual, but I remained patient. Finally, she turned to me and sat, leaning on the countertop. "What did you do to Rodney?" she asked, not angrily or accusingly, but with genuine concern. She met my eyes, then looked around the room. "I've been in Atlantic City all week. I haven't seen Rodney since the party." "You heard him, I hope." "He was hospitalized for 2 days. You broke his jaw and nose." "He deserved it." She seemed to have run out of questions. "What were you doing with him in the men's room?" I waited, but she didn't answer. "Why did he put his hand up your skirt?" Still silence. Marcy clenched her fists and stared at the counter. "Why aren't you at work? And why are the kids home from school? I had to quit my job. I couldn't go back there. I took the boys out of school because your mother said you'd be home today." It was time for a confrontation. "I told you there's only one rule. Don't humiliate me or my family. It's a simple rule." "Why did you break it? Why did you two decide to do that?" Marcy became increasingly agitated. I slammed my fist on the table. "Why, God damn it! Answer me! I don't know why! It just happened," she cried. "You were sitting there like a lost puppy, and we thought we could take advantage of the situation. We had no idea you'd go crazy. You were acting like a lunatic. I was terrified." At least I'd gotten some emotion out of her, even if it made no sense. I didn't bother analyzing her words. Their actions were stupid. They had weeks to get together before the party without me knowing. They chose that time and place to humiliate me. Her rambling wouldn't change that. Marcy, you have 3 choices. Stay here and be a decent mother to your children. Get a divorce and leave without them. Or just disappear. If you stay, we won't live as husband and wife, and I won't tolerate any more affairs with Rodney or anyone else. At the mention of Rodney, Marcy burst into tears and ran from the room sobbing before she could make a choice. We'll finish this conversation tomorrow, I muttered. I made some changes. I rented a small apartment a few blocks from the house, close enough for the boys to visit any time. Carla moved in with me. The police questioned me a few more times, then stopped. Rodney Foote was picked up by a cab outside the hospital and vanished without a trace. His family offered a reward for information, but nothing came of it. I had dinner with Marcy and the boys nightly, spending as much time as possible with my sons on weekends. It was evident to all that Marcy and I were no longer a couple, though still married. She spent considerable time with her parents and sister, which didn't bother me. There was no indication she was seeing anyone else. She'd quit her job after the Christmas party and seemed uninterested in finding new employment. We never finished that initial conversation after my return from Atlantic City. She played the role of a good mother. The house was clean, the boys were fed and clothed. I handled all the yard work and exterior maintenance. Marcy received $200 weekly for household expenses, food, and personal needs. I always offered more, but she always declined. We no longer had credit cards. On Thanksgiving and Christmas, the boys and I were with my family, often joined by Carla. Marcy spent the holidays with her family, except for Christmas Eve with the boys. Things got awkward when Terry or Rick tried to discuss their mother and me. We both avoided the topic. I appreciated her discretion, but what could she say? This charade continued for years. Of course, this brief explanation barely scratches the surface of the underlying tension and disagreements, but we were coping. Carla and I were doing well initially. As time passed, she spent more time with her family in Philadelphia and less with me. I couldn't blame her. I owed her immense gratitude for easing the pain of my breakup. As things stood, I couldn't divorce Marcy, and as long as the boys were home, I couldn't kick her out of the house. These were self-imposed restrictions, but I adhered to them. I hated the situation but saw no alternative. Things came to a head when Terry was 16. A new student, a relative of Marcy's former lover, relentlessly taunted Terry about the past. Unprepared for this first-time confrontation, Terry ended up sending Rodney's nephew to the hospital, resulting in a 2-week expulsion and assault charges. Unfortunately, Rick tried to help his brother, losing 2 teeth in the process but earning Terry's admiration. Marcy met us at the door when I brought the boys home. Terry immediately unleashed his anger at her for concealing the truth for so long. Marcy didn't defend herself, just listened. I left them alone and took Rick to the dentist. Rick seemed unconcerned about his missing teeth, but I dreaded the dental bills. When we returned, Marcy was gone. Her car remained, but she'd vanished. Terry said she just grabbed her purse and left without a word or explanation. I took a week off work to sort things out. Marcy's family refused to speak to me. After a week, I still had no clue about her whereabouts or intentions. Carla and I moved into the house. Sharing a bed was initially awkward, but the boys adjusted better than expected. One day while I was at work, everything belonging to Marcy disappeared from the house. I didn't know what Carla did with it and never asked. Carla assumed all of Marcy's former chores. I got her credit cards to simplify things. It was odd trusting my mistress more than my wife. I sold Marcy's car and bought Carla a new one. With the new order, family gatherings became less stressful. Carla was happier, and my mother was thrilled. Terry and Rick had no more school problems, and Rodney's nephew never returned. Things were looking up, but I was still married. After 2 months, I reported Marcy missing to the police, classifying her as a runaway spouse to facilitate a divorce based on abandonment. 2 months later, I filed the divorce papers. Her absence had to last a year for the divorce to be finalized. I'd planned everything meticulously. Life normalized. Terry and Rick readily accepted Carla. They never called her Mom, always Carla, but it was fine. We were more of a family than we'd been in years. Then, one day, the divorce was final. I was a free man. 2 weeks later, Carla and I drove to Elkton and got married. We were a family again. Terry graduated high school and joined the Air Force a year later. Rick decided to attend meat-cutting school in Toledo. Everything moved quickly. Soon, Carla and I were alone. We hadn't heard from Marcy. Mom and Dad moved to a college town, making everyone promise to visit twice a year. Nothing else kept us there. In Reading, Carla and I moved back to Philadelphia after graduation. Rick landed a job at a high-end butcher shop in Westchester. We saw him a few times a month, and he always surprised us with delicious treats. About a year later, one of Carla's nieces was getting married, and we attended, naturally. An Italian wedding in Philly is a grand affair. Huge crowds, mostly relatives, and a fair share of freeloaders seeking free food and drinks. But it didn't matter. There was plenty to go around. We were enjoying the evening with friends when I noticed Carla seemed on edge. She repeatedly glanced across the dance floor, as if fixated on something. I looked, but saw nothing. I dismissed it until my wife excused herself to the restroom. Something felt off. I watched her walk down the hall and meet an old friend. They chatted and posed, but it all seemed innocent enough. Carla didn't go to the restroom, but approached one of S's associates. Carla gestured toward the table her friend had just left. 3 men and 3 women sat there, looking like wannabe tough guys and their overdressed, predatory companions. Carla returned, looking thoughtful but confident. "Tony, we have a problem. I gathered that from your circling the room. Care to explain?" "Stay calm. In a few minutes, one of the guys at Gina's table is going to come over and try to start a fight with you. What the hell for? He'll insult you, try to provoke you. When you react, all 3 will jump you. And I'm supposed to just let them? Play along until Bobby V and the guys are in position. You might have to handle one of them, but that's the worst of it. Play along how? Let him insult you, then agree with him. If he calls you an asshole, ask him how much he'll pay you to be one. Something like that. Just don't let him get to you." "Why is this happening? What did I do to these guys? Look at Gina's table. See the guy with the short platinum hair? Look closer. Oh, that's Marcy. What the hell is she doing here? Marcy's boyfriend is connected to the groom somehow. Looks like she's still bitter and put him up to this. When she saw you here, she probably wanted payback. While you and S's boys handle things here, Gina and I will talk to Marcy in the restroom. It won't be pleasant. I didn't like this. It was a wedding. The bride should have happy memories. It wasn't fair for thugs to ruin it." 10 minutes later, Marcy's boyfriend got up. I excused myself from our table, catching Carla's knowing glance. I casually strolled toward the side exit where people smoked. The guy nodded, and the other 2 followed. What they didn't see were 3 guys with Louisville sluggers emerging from behind the bar, courtesy of the establishment. About 6 people were smoking outside. I told them to leave. They sensed the urgency in my voice and quickly obliged. I walked about 20 feet from the door, stopped, and turned around. They came out smiling, but their smiles vanished when they saw the 3 guys with bats and the father of the bride. It was over in seconds. I never lifted a finger. "I apologize for any inconvenience I caused you or your family on this special evening," I said, feeling like a character from The Godfather. "Thank you for taking it outside," he replied, shaking my hand before returning to his daughter. I thanked S's boys for their help and went to find Carla. They stayed behind to clean up. It was time to go. Carla was nowhere to be found, and Marcy's table was empty. Rick, there with friends, had heard about the commotion and found me at the bar getting a drink. "Dad, what the hell happened?" My first instinct was to stay silent, but that didn't work. "Your mother was here with her new boyfriend." "I don't need to know more than that," he said, grinning and ordering a beer. We chatted about other things for an hour until a slightly disheveled Carla appeared. "Where were you?" "Gina and I had to take your ex-wife to the hospital. She wasn't feeling well." Rick and I burst out laughing. "Tony, can we go home now?" It was a long but eventful night. We never saw Marcy again. Carla and I are still together back in the old neighborhood. Life is good.